get started, can you just introduce who you are and kind of talk a little bit about Friedberg's anniversary? I'm imagining that this was born sort of out of the group that was talking about the anniversary year and kind of things that you could do. So can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got here?
Absolutely. Well, I am Laura Overcash, and I've been a member at Friedberg for about 10 years, give or take a few months. I currently serve on the communication team. I serve on the board of trustees, and I'm also a member of the 250th anniversary committee, which kind of brought me here, like you just said, for the podcast. It's been a crazy, exciting whirlwind of the year, and we're only in May right now with our 250th anniversary celebrations and upcoming events. We've been planning since, I guess, last summer for everything that we're hoping to have of this year of celebrating. And, you know, when we were throwing out ideas, we had this list of like 30 things that we thought we wanted to do. And then we realized that 30 is a lot for a small group. Everything was a fantastic idea, but it had to be whittled down. And one of the ideas was sharing the history of the church. For 250 years, there's just so much of it, you know, and little snippets here and there are just fascinating. And we were going around the room, and some of the members on the committee have been lifelong members, others have been new members. It was really interesting to hear the stories. So that kind of was like, hey, you've got stories. We want to talk about history. Let's do a podcast. They're popular. People like them. They're snippets. They're easy to digest. And our church historian is on the committee with us, Jimmy Snyder. And I was like, wait, Jimmy is all things history. And this was right up his alley. You know, when we started talking about it, he kind of lit up and was like, oh yeah, I can tell you about, and he started naming off things. And it was like, I want to know more. And I know if I want to know, other folks want to know more about these crazy little fun historical tidbits. Some are, you know, some of the tidbits are more really like historical based. Others are just kind of things that just kind of happened along the way that are fun to talk about.
Do you have a favorite story that you've heard so far?
Oh gosh, we've only had 8 episodes, so I'm sure there's some more exciting stuff that'll be coming down the pipe. But I think my favorite one at this point is featured in episode 2. It's called Spring Thunderstorms and Fresh Coffee. Just because I can relate to the story in a way, because I remember the events. What happened was the May 5th storms blew through the Winston-Salem area. You know, it devastated the area, it uprooted trees and that sort of thing. Well, we're grateful that Friedberg was not touched by those storms. However, and I don't remember this until we were recording the podcast, some other additional strong storms came through later that week, like on Saturday night, and the church was scheduled to have a love feast on Sunday. So they get to the church and there's no power, and it's like, what are we going to do? We're going to have this love feast. So we're grateful for the folks of Friedberg. They have a historical room, and they stored these big old pots that they used to make the coffee in over the fire back many, many moons ago. So the gentlemen of the church pull out the pots, they build a fire, and they make fresh coffee for the love feast with no power. And, you know, who else was making fresh coffee in these big pots for the entire congregation? And that's just one of the fun little stories that I've heard along the way.
Yeah, I think that's so cool that you're talking about history, but you didn't just start at the very beginning and sort of work your way up, but it's a mixture of stories that people in recent memory can say like, oh yeah, I was there for that. And I think it's so interesting, churches with such a long history, 250 years is a long time. You know, you've seen so much change around you. So it's such an interesting way to bring that conversation and celebration to people, but also to give a platform to say like, what kind of history are we making now? What is the ministry and the ways that God is showing up for us right now? So I'm excited to see sort of where you take this. Do you have like a goal in mind about how many podcasts you hope to do in this year? Are you sort of playing it by ear?
You know, we're hoping to continue throughout the year. So we're doing 2 a month right now, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot of work and a lot of effort. So yeah, we're hoping to continue through the end of the year and just kind of see where it goes from there. As for kind of the format, we've been really talking a lot about the podcast is kind of broken up into 3 segments. The first part is a historical piece, kind of like the coffee story I just told you. The second piece of the podcast episode is kind of talking to someone in the congregation about an upcoming event or something that might be of interest, a story, that sort of thing. And then the third part of the podcast is reading of the Moravian daily text for the day that it's going to be released. So I'm hoping that as we move forward, we're going to have more really great stories from our congregational members. People are a little shy, a little hesitant, but once, you sit down and you start talking to them just kind of like this, they open up and you can kind of just guide them and lead them, and you can get some really great stories that, they start and it just goes deeper and deeper. So we're hoping to tap in to the congregation members to kind of share more of their stories, because that is just fascinating, firsthand accounts, because like you said, it's history, but it's recent history as well.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that we really hope to do more of at the Commission for Congregational Development, is to have people tell their stories. And so often I'm in meetings with congregational groups or boards, and they're telling me things, and I'm just like, oh my, if other people could hear what you're talking about, it's so exciting to see like how you're at work in ministry right now, and thinking about the ways that it inspires other people to see themselves in those stories. Like I love the idea of like bringing more congregation members to tell their stories, because it is nerve-wracking to tell your story, but as you said, it's so important to know that like once you get started, you actually have more story to tell than I think sometimes we tell ourselves, right? Like, oh, well, what I think or what I feel or what I've experienced is not a big deal. This is somebody else's story is better. So I think that's so cool. Just on the technical side, you said it's a lot of work. Can you talk to us a little bit about like what it's been like? Have you done podcasting before? Was this something that you knew how to do, or was it something that you learned how to do? And what does it entail kind of on the backside?
So yeah, this is my first podcast. My real job in real life is I do marketing and creative stuff for a consulting firm. So I've had the opportunity to kind of dabble in sort of all things creative. I was grateful to have this opportunity when COVID arose. I was able to kind of roll these skills over into church stuff. So we did a deep dive into video, graphics, creative things that way. So this was just kind of a natural movement over to the podcast. From the technical side of things, we're using a lot of that video content or video platforms that we've used for other stuff along the way. I know there's a lot easier stuff out there, but we use what we have. You make the most of what you know and you know how to use. So we have, as for our setup, we have some really nice lapel mics that we bought when COVID hit. And those work really, really well. They drowned out the sound. We use a streaming platform called Podbeam, Podbeam. And it's very cost effective. It's really easy to use, and it's really easy to set up. And it integrates into a lot of those other podcast platforms. Like right now, we are on Amazon Music, Google Podcast as well. And I know it integrates into Apple Podcasts, which we're working on doing as well. And we were really blessed to be able to put Podbean, they have a little plug-in onto our website as well. So it's an easy to integrate platform. So basically kind of the process is we kind of, schedule an hour time with our guests. We sit down, we just talk. We use our video camera to record the audio because it's such a good capturing item instead of using a computer. I know you can use a computer to do that. And then we just throw it into some Adobe software and edit it from there. And like I said, there's some really easy free tools that you can use for that as well, but we use what we have.
That is really cool. Now, do you do the editing?
I do.
And how long does that take for you?
Each episode, I probably take about 2 hours, just because when people speak, there's ums and ands and sometimes some awkward pauses because you'll start moving. And I know I've done this in this interview. You'll start talking and don't know where you're going to end up. And you just kind of hover there making some awkward noises. So we want to make sure people sound really professional and well-spoken. So, it takes time and effort to take those out, but we want everybody to shine and sound fantastic on our podcast.
Yeah, it's amazing. I used to produce a podcast and I've just found how often um, I heard my own verbal tics, like I'd be like, oh, how often I've said that, trying to get from one thing to the other, which feels so natural in conversation, but on a podcast, you do sort of cutting those out can make it really flow really much more smoothly.
Mhm.
If another congregation was thinking about starting a podcast, what are the kinds of things that you might share with them that you've learned that have helped you along the way?
So I guess the biggest takeaway that I could share is time. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time. When I record these podcasts, I try to do 2 at a time. It just makes life a whole lot easier to have somebody sit down, because work-life balance is important, especially when you're doing stuff with the church as well. So recording 2, um, it's not going to be perfect. I know a lot of people are perfectionists. Just roll with it. We're all human. We love to see that and hear that in the podcast. Um, Kind of be flexible. Going in, you may have one vision and that vision may turn into something else. So be flexible. You may think an interview is going to be about, this subject, but you start talking and it totally morphs into something else. Just roll with it. That's the interesting thing, because your listeners can kind of hear the progression of, oh, wow, look how they started from point A and got to point B, C, D, and just keep going. So just be flexible and have fun with it. And don't be scared of your own voice. I really don't like my voice, but I'm using it as a ministry, and I kind of understand that going in as well. So just embrace it. God gave you the voice, and use it and use your talents.
That is really awesome. It's so obvious that you're really excited, that there's a lot of energy around this. Are people in the congregation excited about hearing these stories? Do you kind of get feedback on when you produce a podcast? Do you hear people talking about it and sharing it with other people? Is it doing those kinds of things in your community?
It is. I'm grateful that we're hearing feedback from folks. Folks are loving, they tell us they love that story that, Jimmy Snyder told about, a certain topic, or we love that we didn't know about something. So we get that sort of feedback. With the age of our congregation, some of them are not as technical savvy. So we've had folks come up to us and say, we want to hear it, we just don't know how to get there. So, we've helped folks along the way. One of the most exciting things, at least I think, is we have a Prayers and Squares group that meets every Monday at the church. They make fantastic and beautiful quilts. And apparently they listen to the podcast every Monday when a new one is released while they're making their quilts. So, they listen to it as a group, and who knows, they probably discuss it afterwards. I have no idea, but it warms my heart to think about this group that's listening to this podcast together and hopefully laughing with us and going, oh, that was really cool as well. So, we're kind of all helping each other listen to this podcast as well. And, people come up to us and say, hey, I have an idea for another episode. You should talk to this church member, or you guys should really talk about this topic, because I remember that as a kid. So we're getting all sorts of feedback from all sorts of directions.
That is really fun. It might actually be fun to have the Prayers and Squares group on a podcast to talk about what it's been like to listen to the history and what it's taught them about this community that they're a part of. That is really
I'm working on them.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's just really exciting to see churches trying new things. I think during the pandemic, so many churches felt like they had no choice but to try some new things. But it's exciting to see that energy and trying new things can continue on into the future and give us some ways to really share our stories and celebrate our communities, and hopefully connect our stories to people who haven't known about us before, and to invite them into following Jesus alongside of us and learning what God is up to. So I just thank you so much for your time and for your ministry of this podcast and for all the ways that you're contributing to that. That's really great.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate it. And I want to invite all your listeners and viewers to take a listen to our podcast. It's called History from the Hill of Peace. And you can find it on our church website, which is friedberg.church. You can find it on Podbean. You can find it on Apple. Not yet. We're working on Apple. You can find it on Amazon Music and Google Podcast as well. So take a listen. We'd love to hear your feedback as well.
That's great. Thanks so much. We'll definitely share those links and everything so that people can get connected.
All right. Thank you.